I declare open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs for the inquiry into racism, hate and violence toward Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their cultural and spiritual connections to Australia's lands and waters. In accordance with the Committee's resolution of 6 August 2025, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of proceedings will be published on the inquiry website. Any answers to questions on notice taken at this public hearing will also be published on the Committee's website. I remind members of the media who may be present or listening online of the need to fairly and accurately report proceedings of the Committee. I now call on representatives from the Aboriginal Medical Services Alliance, NT, to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear?
My name is Rob McPhee and I'm here as the Chair of the Aboriginal Medical Services Alliance of the Northern Territory.
Thank you. Although the Committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege and is being broadcast live on Parliament's website. You can see the members of the committee who are here this afternoon. Rather than getting everyone to introduce themselves, you can look at our nameplates at the front of us. And I'll now invite you to make an opening statement.
Fantastic. I too would like to acknowledge the Larrakia people whose lands we are meeting on today. Good morning, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. As I said, my name is Rob McPhee and I'm appearing on behalf of AMSANT as the Chair, but I'm also the CEO of the Niladilga Health Service, which is the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Service, providing health services to Aboriginal people across the Greater Darwin region. My people are Nyamal people from the Pilbara region of WA, Yamaji from the Midwest region of WA, and two of my great-grandparents are stolen generation survivors, both removed as children and placed into missions in the early 1900s. I'm pleased to speak on behalf of AMSANT, who is the peak body for Aboriginal community-controlled health services here in the NT. Our sector exists because of the strength and leadership of Aboriginal people. It was built in response to exclusion, and it continues to stand as a model of what works when our people have control of services. I would like to begin with a simple but critical truth. Racism in Australia is structural and it is embedded within the systems and institutions that shape our people's lives. For us, racism cannot be separated from the history and ongoing reality of colonisation. Our dispossession from our lands, the denial of our sovereignty and our exclusion from decision-making are not isolated historical events. They are deliberate acts that continue to shape our lives today. And without acknowledging that truth, we cannot meaningfully address the racism that continues to drive inequality today. Interpersonal racism is experienced by our people every single day. It is a common and ongoing experience for us. It happens in our hospitals, our schools, our workplaces and our public spaces. It is often subtle, it is often dismissed, but it is frequent, cumulative and leaves lasting harm. Importantly, racism is not experienced as a single event. It is carried across a lifetime. It becomes a chronic source of stress with profound impacts on our people's sense of safety, identity, confidence and well-being. This directly results in poorer health and social and emotional well-being outcomes for our people. But it is not enough to focus on individual behaviour alone. The primary driver of inequity in this country is systemic racism. Systemic racism is embedded in policies, the way decisions are made and how services are delivered. It shapes who gets access, who is heard and who is left behind. We see it in a health system that too often fails to recognise our ways of knowing, being and healing. We see it in an education system that continues to fail our children. We see it in the overrepresentation of our people in the criminal justice system. We see it in housing systems where overcrowding and poor living conditions remain widespread. And these are predictable outcomes of systems that were designed without our input, with no understanding or consideration of our cultures, our languages and our needs. These systems were often designed to suppress those matters which were essential to us as Aboriginal people. And that leads to my final point. If systemic racism is the problem, then systemic reform must be the solution. That means accountability, truth-telling and embedding cultural safety across our institutions. It means equitable funding, clear targets, measuring progress and holding systems accountable for delivering equity. But above all, it means shifting power. Aboriginal community control is therefore not an add-on to the system. It is a central mechanism for addressing racism. Aboriginal community-controlled health services were created in response to racism and exclusion in mainstream systems. They provide culturally safe care, they create jobs for our community, they build trust, they reduce barriers to access and they deliver better outcomes because they are grounded in community, in culture and in self-determination. And we've always seen where we lead, we have better outcomes. That is why strengthening the community control sector through equitable investment, genuine partnership and shared decision-making is essential. If we are serious about addressing racism in Australia, we must move beyond acknowledgement. We must confront the systems that maintain inequity and we must back Aboriginal community control as the central part of that solution. Anything less will continue to fail our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McPhee. We'll move to questions and begin with Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the work that you do. Grassroots organisations looking after our people. You talked about systemic, changing the system basically. So to be able to do that, we need those systems here. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but there is no Northern Territory government representation at all at this inquiry, yesterday or today. So if we're going to change a system and deal with the perpetrators through the system, what's your comments about them not even being part of this inquiry?
I think it's very disappointing. I think it's extremely disappointing. I think government controls some of the most influential systems that impact on everybody's lives. And in order for us to address the systemic racism or issues around racism within systems, we need the system leaders to be part of those discussions, and they need to be part of the thinking around the need for change. And that's part of the challenge. And I think the Productivity Commission report into the closing the gap and the lack of progress, I think, points to that issue that governments are just not taking the reforms seriously. And without those reforms being taken seriously, it's very hard for us to shift. We just keep yelling the same issue, and unless we've got government listening and willing to look at how to break down the structural barriers and put in place better systems that better represent, better talk to and better share power with communities, then we're going to continue to have this problem.
Can you tell the panel about residents at Katherine being evacuated or seeking shelter at relief centres after the worst flooding in 28 years in March this year? What did our people experience at that time?
Look, I'm not personally involved in the evacuation of Katherine residents and communities to Darwin, but certainly so we, as a service provider in Darwin, we are the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Service. We weren't involved in the evacuation or service delivery for those clients. We weren't asked to be involved, not formally, but there were often conversations being had with us around concerns about the conditions of those facilities and how people were feeling really uncomfortable being there. And were seeking our support to provide services, but we weren't able to because we weren't formally involved. So that's the only observation I can make, is from the requests that we had from community members or people who lived in Darwin, had family members there, asking us for help. But that's the only involvement we had.
Thank you. You make it very clear that addressing racism is actually quite straightforward in your submission. It requires governments at territory and federal levels to move beyond acknowledgement of racism and to instead take action such as by implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the National Anti-Racism Framework into law, policy and practice. In your view, what do you think is stopping this from happening?
Firstly, I think implementing those things are probably not straightforward, and probably the reason why they do require fundamental structural change. And I think that they are challenging. You know, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, Australia's been a signatory to that for many years, but we've never really seen the translation of that commitment to domestic legislation or domestic laws. And I think because to enact self-determination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people means that we have to fundamentally change the way that we do things in this country. And I think, you know, that includes things like legislative change and I think things like the failed voice was an attempt to try to enact some of the principles of self-determination as intended through the declaration. But it didn't, it failed, and I think it actually caused more harm in the end. I think my experience is that since the failed voice, particularly interpersonal racism seems to be much more open and people are much more comfortable in saying what they really think about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I think part of the challenge of implementing those reports and recommendations is that it is very difficult to do, and but we can't just keep writing reports that tell the same outcome and keep making recommendations that we fail to implement. And that's why our submissions suggest that that's the first step. It is complex, but the first step is putting in place those fundamental reforms that have already been considered, designed and recommended. That's step one.
Just one, I think, last question is here. Can you explain to this committee why racism against our people is the primary driver of health inequity experienced by our people?
I don't know whether it's the primary driver. I think it's racism is considered one of the key social determinants of health. There's an interpersonal level of racism where being exposed to racism impacts your well-being, it impacts your feelings about who you are, it impacts your identity, it impacts the way that you see the world. You're either angry because the way that you see yourself has been portrayed in this really negative light, and so that has an enormous impact on your well-being and your ability to live a healthy, strong life. And so we know that racism plays an enormous role, and we've got a social and emotional wellbeing team who provide counselling services to our community across Darwin, and we know that many of our, and the data suggests it too, that many of our community are overrepresented in terms of mental health issues and anxiety and depression. And a lot of that is the direct result of the experience of racism, either on an interpersonal level, so direct racism from other people, or reading it in comments on social media, or being watched through a shopping centre, whatever it is. we know that that has enormous impact on people's sense of self and their ability to be strong and healthy. And that then affects the way that they interact with others. It affects the way that you make decisions about the food that you eat, the alcohol that you drink, your behaviour all becomes impacted from the way that you perceive yourself. And so racism can be really damaging on that front. From a systems level, we can see racism result in the loss of life. You know, we can see misdiagnosis in health systems where there's assumptions made that because you're an Aboriginal person, you smoke, you drink, you do these things. And so often a diagnosis can be skewed because of these underlying racist assumptions that clinicians hold. And we've seen many cases where inaccurate diagnoses have been made, and it's largely to do with the assumptions that were made about the race of that person. So we can see that from a systemic level, particularly in the health system, people can lose their life because people have these views or assumptions about people. And I think more broadly, when you look at education and lack of, in the Northern Territory, we've got a very low rate of Aboriginal people completing Year 12. That sets the standard for the well-being of that person's life for the rest of their life. Without a strong education, their ability to get a job, earn an income, buy a house, do all of those things that you need to survive in Australia are very limited. And the data, the research shows that the higher educational outcome you have, the higher health outcomes you have. And so when you've got systems that aim to increase school attendance by punishing parents, by fining them, because then their kids aren't turning up to school, shows us a school system or another example of a system that's failing to understand the actual issue around these kids not attending school, which then, without them attending school, means that they're not graduating Year 12, their ability to get a job is limited, and so we're just creating this cycle because these systems continue to perpetuate. And so I think they're examples of where the racism at an interpersonal and a structural level plays out.
So just follow up, do non-Aboriginal parents get fined for not taking their kids to school?
I think so, yeah. I think that's...
It's just a rule across the board.
But they're the subtle things, and we talk about it in terms of unintended consequences, or where laws that are enacted have disproportionate impacts on Aboriginal people. And that's, I think, part of the subtle structural racism that we see every day, where laws are enacted that are really only going to impact on Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory, and everybody knows it, but it's considered okay because it's applied to everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Mr Benning.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr McPhee, for coming and giving evidence this morning. You mentioned that we can't keep writing reports. Writing reports is easy. I would extend that to we can't keep creating bureaucracies. My experience is that if something doesn't work, we tend to not go to the root cause. We just create a new bureaucracy. We just change what we do, but we still get the end result. To Junior in my electorate, we have 37 government agencies, NGOs or ACOs, but only 3 of them actually provide frontline services, and you would argue that the situation there has been getting worse. So my question is around, holding the existing bureaucracies to account as opposed to creating new systems. And I just want to highlight one part of your submission. Recommendation 5D of your submission calls for a new Aboriginal-led independent statutory body, directly answerable to Parliament, to hold governments, funders and service providers accountable. Now, in that space, we have the Human Rights Commission, the Anti-Discrimination Commission, the Productivity Commission, all reporting under the Closing the Gap targets. Do we need another body, or can we just strengthen the current oversight mechanisms and hold the current bureaucrats to account?
I think it's important to understand the role and function of the different bureaucratic structures. So the Human Rights Commission, for example, has a very clear scope and has a responsibility around monitoring performance against our commitments to international human rights declarations, and so there's a formal function for that. The Anti-Discrimination Commissioner also under the legislation has a very specific role. I think where there's natural harmonisation across these sorts of bureaucratic structures, I think it makes sense to be able to align them. But where they've got very specific focus areas, I think it's very hard just to task another bureaucracy or system to address an issue. I think what that part of the recommendation calls for is an Aboriginal-led independent body. So both the Human Rights Commission and the Anti-Discrimination Commission are not Aboriginal-led. And so this is about privileging the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to observe, monitor, track the accountability and performance of the systems that are meant to be providing outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Nobody does that at the moment. Government does it, but it's doing a report card on itself. And so this is about an independent, people who've got skin in the game, people who want to see changes at a community level are the ones that are speaking to Parliament around whether that's working or not and holding some level of accountability for the inaction where that's taking place.
Yeah, it makes sense. And do you think federal government needs to play a better role in holding existing bureaucrats and existing systems better to account? You know, we set these targets, but we don't meet them and we just let them slide. Do we as a Commonwealth need to play a better role there?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that's reflected throughout our recommendations, is this idea of accountability and making and intentionally embedding actions and quality improvement and KPIs to force these systems to perform better. Because we know, it's unfortunate. If we're in an ideal world, the systems would be doing their job and meeting the needs of everybody, and they're not. And so we know that if we set the standard we expect, we then need to monitor performance against that standard, and we need to then either reward or punish or not reward systems that aren't performing. And so we talk about it from a health perspective that hospitals should be required under their funding to be able to show that they are delivering cultural competency in making hospitals safe and free of racism. That it's an intention, it's a principle at the moment, but there's no accountability and there's no consequences if they aren't. Well, there's no ability to measure whether they are or not, and if you were able to, there's still no consequence. So we're asking for an introduction of the kind of structural systems to be able to monitor, set the standards, monitor whether those standards are being met, report them publicly, and then have consequences if they're not being met. I think that's the only way we're going to see systems change. We can all sign a statement of commitment or a partnership agreement that then sits on a shelf, like the Closing the Gap Partnership Agreement, but unless there's actual monitoring performance and then consequences, then it just becomes idealistic policy.
Thanks, Mr. Fee. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr G.
Yes, good morning and thank you for your evidence today. In your key recommendations, you talk about the implementation of a national anti-racism framework and as a part of that, embedding anti-racism accountability across all government institutions, system structures, policy and programs, etc., directly related to and affecting Aboriginal people and communities. Are you able to kind of give some more details as to what that looks like and how you would go about doing that?
I don't know whether I'd have that level of detail in terms of
That's all right.
Understanding. And what we refer to is the work that's already been done. So there's a report which suggests, which has identified, it was a scoping review on the impact of racism. And so what we're saying, and there was also another report that was done around, that's identified a range of recommendations. We're suggesting that they be implemented. That's simply what we're saying. I don't know how you'd implement them. I don't know. That's not my job.
I understand.
But I think that's the focus: is how do we take what's been studied, what evidence has been gathered, what recommendations have been made around racism, and how do we then start to implement those things?
But it's the broader principle that you're looking to achieve there, with some sort of structures in place to deal with racism.
That's right, and they've been very, that's important work that's been done. That's unpacked the issue of racism, how we can change systems to be more responsive and better accommodating in response to racism. We want to see those things now implemented, because there's no point in us just writing about them.
Can you have a look at recommendation 9, if you would, in the submission?
Yep.
Which deals with Aboriginal community control central to combating racism. And I'm just wondering if you can give us some background on recommendation 9 there, and what's the background to that recommendation and what's been happening with respect to that. And that's dealing with the transfer of primary health services from the NT government to Aboriginal community control, as seems to have been committed to. What's the story with that?
So in my opening statement, I mentioned the role of Aboriginal community-controlled health services as a important part of responding to racism, so supporting our community in terms of mental health services, all of that kind of stuff. And they've been born out of the exclusion from health services. So Redfern Aboriginal Medical Service was our first one in the 70s, set up in Sydney. And it was set up because in those days, Aboriginal people were excluded from hospitals and mainstream services. It was just outright racism. And so we were born out of responding to the need for culturally appropriate, accessible, safe services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that's the kind of foundation of why we exist as a sector. And as I mentioned, our community trust us, they access us, we're able to provide good care as a result of being there. And we also create jobs for our community. In the Northern Territory and right across Australia, so there's 145 Aboriginal community-controlled health services nationally. We're a networked sector, so we've got NACHO, our peak body in Canberra, we've got state and territory peaks, and in the Northern Territory there are two main primary healthcare providers. There's the Aboriginal community-controlled sector and there's the Northern Territory Government. Yep. And so the Northern Territory Government still run about 43 remote primary healthcare clinics.
Right.
And so it's our recommendation, and we're working at the Northern Territory Aboriginal Health Forum level, and AMSAND is working across the territory to work with the Northern Territory Government to transition those 43 clinics from being government-run primary healthcare clinics to being Aboriginal Community-Controlled Health Service-run primary healthcare clinics. And so that may require us to establish new services, or it may require us to establish services that have a hub-and-spoke model where they might have 5 or 6 remote communities operating under an Aboriginal community-controlled health service, similar to what Central Australian Congress do in Central Australia, Katherine West Health Board do in the Western Katherine region, where they've got a main service and they run multiple clinics. And so those Aboriginal community-controlled health services are run by the community. They're a board made up of the local Aboriginal community. Membership is local Aboriginal people, and we usually have much higher Aboriginal employment outcomes. So, for example, at Nilladilba, we've got about 51% of our employees, 270 employees, are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that we can provide better outcomes in those communities by providing care through Aboriginal community-controlled health services. And so we're advocating for those remaining 43 remote clinics to transition over the next 10 to 15 years.
So it's the case that the federal and territory governments and AMSAND have all agreed to this.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's right.
And when did they do that?
So it's now one of our priorities in the most recent Northern Territory Aboriginal Health Forum strategic plan, which was endorsed late last year. So that's one of our areas, and AMSAND's now established a team within the organisation. And it's also one of AMSAND's strategic priorities under our strategic plan as well. But that's where it's been signed off at. So the Northern Territory Aboriginal Health Forum has been running since 1998. It's a tripartite forum where I chair that as the chair of AMSAND. And it includes the Commonwealth Government through the Department of Health, Indigenous Health Division and Primary Healthcare Division, NDIA, National Indigenous Australians Agency. That's it from Commonwealth. And then Northern Territory Government, we've got the Department of Health, Chief Minister and Cabinet as well. And so that's the Territory's peak decision-making body for Aboriginal health. And that's, I think, a really good example of how when you bring us all together and we have equal say and we have an ability to influence, we get better outcomes. And as I said, the forum's been running for since 1998, 28 years. And they're the sorts of things that we can achieve through those sorts of agreements.
So are you making enough progress on the transfers, or there's
We've
more
just
work
agreed
needed?
to it.
So it's just recent?
Yeah, we met with Minister Butler recently.
Right.
And we've talked about, and we've met with Minister Edgington here, and both are very supportive. We need to do some groundwork in terms of consultation with communities. We can't just impose this change. Communities have got to want it. We then need to look at what that model might look like, how many new services we might need. There's a whole infrastructure piece as well. So there's existing clinics and staff housing that belong to the Northern Territory Government or are unknown because they're on Crown land, and there's all sorts of land tenure issues. But there's a whole lot of work that we need to do to understand what's there and how do we prepare for that transition. And there will be a point where we will need increased funding to be able to fund those services, because the way that the Northern Territory Government funds primary healthcare services into remote communities is less than what the Commonwealth fund us to deliver services, which is why we get better outcomes generally through our services as well.
All right, thank you very much for that. And finally, if there's one message you wanted to give to this committee on combating racism in the experience of you and your organisation, what would it be? What do you want to? What's the one big thing you want to see this committee achieve?
I think it's got to be a fundamental kind of approach to combating racism in Australia. I think there's a real opportunity. I think Australia has an identity challenge. I think I'd love to see where we can move away from seeing Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal history, Aboriginal connection to land as a burden to this country and see it as something we should celebrate. And that's, I think, it's not just changing interpersonal relationships, it's not just changing structural, it's about changing the psyche, I think, of us as a country, that we should be proud of that, and we should be proud to create opportunities to see Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people rise and become strong and powerful in this country. And I think that's probably at the core of addressing racism, because racism has been here since 1788, and it's continued in different shapes and forms. And I think we've got to really come to terms with what we need to do as a country to change that.
Thank you again for your evidence.
No worries.
Thank you, Mr G. Mr Chappie.
Thank you, Chair. Mr McPhee, thank you for coming in this morning, for your submission to the inquiry and also your contribution so far this morning. My question is more to do with funding at a federal level and closing the gap measures that have been announced. I see in a media release you put out on the 14th of May that you welcome the funding, something like nearly $800 million over different aspects of health. But also in that media release you do talk about the complexity and the pressures within the system, and from what I've read so far and submissions that and presentations we heard yesterday, I just don't have a clear picture about what that pressure looks like. So I wonder if you could expand on that, looking not just today, but what that looks like into the near future.
Thank you. So I think the media release you mentioned is in relation to the NTRI, the Northern Territory Remote Aboriginal Investment announcement of $840 million, I think it was, by the Commonwealth over 6 years. Is that the one?
So it's closing the gap over 5 years, $793.7 million.
Okay.
Measures, yeah. On the 14th
nationally.
of May.
Nationally, is that right? Not just for the Northern
That's
Territory.
right. No, that's national.
Okay. Can you just ask your question again? I just want to be really clear about what it is.
So I'm just, my question goes to the federal funding under closing the gap. I'm more looking at a lens of equity, and you talk about you've welcomed the funding that has been announced. But my question is, allocated, but you certainly allude in your media release about the complexities, the pressures that are there financially, and also already in some of your conversation this morning, you talk about more need. So I'd like to know what that looks like.
Okay. Look, I probably best to answer this from the perspective of the health sector. So if you look at burden of disease, and so that's the rate at which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people carry the burden of chronic disease or other illnesses. Generally speaking, across most indicators, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people carry a much higher burden of disease, higher rates of COPD, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher rates of diabetes, those sorts of burden. And when you look at the equity of funding for primary health care across the country, NACHO, our national peak body, has done some work that shows that for the rate of disease that we face in our community, the average per dollar spent for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander primary health care versus non-Aboriginal primary health care, there's a gap of about $2.4 billion a year. And so what that talks to is that while services like ours are funded, we've got 15,000 people use our service each year. We provide about 125,000 contacts and about 85,000 episodes of care. So we're a high volume organisation. A lot of people come through our services. But in terms of the burden of disease that we're seeing, we would need to be funded 3 times the amount to be able to properly address the complexity of our clients. And so that's, in order for us to address the health gap from a primary healthcare perspective, we need to be able to be funded at the level of the disease burden that our community is facing and that we're trying to deliver services to respond to. We also know that to close the gap in healthcare, part of it is about having more services so that we can provide more services to our community. But we also know that we need to simultaneously address the social determinants of health as well. So there's only so much we can do for someone that's walking into our clinic sick if they're living in an overcrowded house, or if if there's scabies, or if there's high rates of rheumatic heart disease, so we can treat that person, we can give them medication, we can try and address the broader issues that they're facing. But unless we can help address that overcrowding issue of housing, our ability to make a difference long term on that individual's health is limited. And same goes with education. So we know that people are more likely to be unwell if they're not employed, have a job, have access to income. So we can treat that person coming through the door, but if they've got no access to a job, no ability to earn an income, it's very difficult for us to improve their general well-being. So there's stuff that we can do as a system, and we should be funded based on the burden of disease that we have to manage, but the rest of the systems need to lift as well in order for us to really address and close the gap. It can't be done by one sector. We all need to lift at the same time.
Okay. So the way to do that obviously is to have all levels of government that are focused. And has it been identified? Is there a pathway forward? Is there? I guess it's difficult to put a dollar figure on what that looks like and how to deliver.
I think we often get caught up on the dollars, and what is so powerful about closing the gap reform and the National Partnership Agreement is there's 4 priority reforms, and they're not about dollars. They're actually, the first one is about sharing decision making. It's about coming together and giving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people a seat at the table when they're being talked about, when issues about education, housing, employment, training, health are being discussed. We should be at the table and have some ability to influence the outcome of the decision that's been made there. The second one is around building the strength of the community-controlled sector, giving community the ability to deliver services to community because we get better outcomes. The third reform is around making mainstream services accountable for improving access for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So hospitals, schools, the police, whoever it is, make them more accountable for providing better services to community. And the fourth one's around data. So it's actually, there's no funding attached to any of that. It's about being part of the decision-making systems that allow for decisions around funding to be allocated to the places that they should be allocated to. That's the fundamental shift that I think needs to happen. It's what the Productivity Commission's review into Closing the Gap said. It's what the intention of Closing the Gap was, is that you can't tinker around the edges. You need the fundamental structural reform. And that's what I think is really difficult, because we've got the Constitution, we've got delegated powers of governments and ministers and all of that stuff. And so it's really hard to understand, how do you share decision-making when you've got this Western system of decision-making within government? And so that's the challenge, is how do we still empower? And there's good examples. The Northern Territory Aboriginal Health Forum is a good example, where we're not replacing the decision-making of the minister, but the minister's listening to the advice that we're giving, because you've got the right people at the table. So we're not about taking their power of decision-making, we're about giving them the right information to make the right decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chaffey. Just a couple of questions from me, and then I'll put the rest of my questions on notice, just because we are running up against time. We've heard a lot about the importance of education through this inquiry, in terms of educating the broader community about impacts of racism, all that kind of stuff. I'm interested in how you might explain to somebody from the work that you do, how racism impacts on things like closing the gap and health outcomes. I think you've kind of given some examples of where that shows up in the health system. But if you're talking to the everyday person on the street, how do you kind of draw that connection between racism and poorer outcomes for mob? Because I think people might not necessarily see those things as connected. And both you and I know that they are. But how do you explain that to the average person on the street?
Yeah.
just an easy thing to explain, yeah.
Well, I think part of it's about, how do we get the average person on the street more receptive to learning and understanding, because it's not a simple answer. And I think people often they see the world very simply. You know, this is my lot, this is how I live, this is how I've got through life, therefore you should do the same. And I think we need to open up more than our own experiences to recognise that other people experience life differently. And so it's not just a one-way education piece. I think it's also, how do we receive information differently? But I always think of it from the perspective of a young Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person growing up in this country. And I've been really fortunate, because I'm fair-skinned, so people don't necessarily aren't directly racist towards me, but I've got family who are very dark, and I've seen and experienced it. But I think about children and their ability to find strength in their identity and who they are, when you've got these pervasive stereotypes about who you are and what that means, and how does a young person find strength in themselves. And I think that's probably, regardless of whether I think a lot of racism, from what I've observed, often the interpersonal racism often occurs as a result of individuals' experiences. So they might have had something happen or observed something, so that they've then suddenly decided that that's how all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are, and then act out in response to that. And I think we've got to encourage people to not judge everybody that way, and understand the impacts that has, whether it's through social media or whether it's calling somebody something racist, on children who are trying to define their way in life. And racism has the potential to set them on the wrong track in terms of being strong people with good sense of themselves, goals, seeing themselves as the Prime Minister, seeing themselves as a basketball player or a model or whatever it is. That's what we want our kids to see themselves in. And instead, what I think we're seeing more and more in this country is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're being seen as all of these negative things, and I think we've got to do better for our kids, because they're the ones that I think we've got to help them be the best versions of themselves. They're our future, not only our community's future, but they're part of the Australian future as well.
And this will be my last question. I think like so much of the public narrative, even in how politicians talk and in how policymakers talk, is about our deficits and less about our mob being successful business people or doctors or whatever. What do you think needs to shift in how we talk about these things?
I think it's a really good point, and I was thinking about this in the lead up to today. Even a lot of the stuff that I've talked about today is all deficit, burden of disease, statistics. We're worse here, we're worse there, we're worse. And if we just look at the world through a deficit lens, we're only ever going to reinforce, I think, deficits. And I do think sitting behind all of that, those statistics, is phenomenal wealth and well-being, and many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples thriving in culture, in community, in business, in society. And I think we've always got to hold those tensions. This isn't about all being problems. This is about we've got people who are struggling and people who are doing really well. And what we've got to try and find is, how do we support people who are struggling, and how do we keep encouraging people that are doing well? I think there's no simple way to do it, but I think we've got to challenge ourselves that this isn't just about focusing on the negatives or people that need help. Absolutely, we need to support people that are there, but we also need to acknowledge,
Celebrate success.
and celebrate, mob that are thriving, because majority of our population are thriving as well. I think we often just focus on the people who are struggling.
Yeah. Okay. It's a fascinating challenge that we've got, I reckon, on that front.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that concludes the time that we have with you, and we are a little bit over, so thank you very much for sticking with us for a little bit longer. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, or you want to provide any additional information, could you please forward that to the Secretariat by the 6th of August? You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of the evidence today, and if you have a read through it and see that there's any errors, you'll have an opportunity to request corrections to the errors that you find there. But thank you very much for your time, and we'll now take a short suspension while we welcome our next witness. I now call on Mr John Lawrence to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear?
Yeah, my full name is John Benjamin Lawrence, Senior Counsel. I'm here as a legal practitioner of 40 years' experience in the Northern Territory in relation to the issues that you're investigating.
Thank you. I'll now read a little spiel that I've got to read,
Of course.
and then I'll invite you to make to say some more things for the committee's benefit. So, although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And is being broadcast live on the Parliament's website, and we do have media in the room as well. I will now invite you to make a brief opening statement.
Thanks very much. Good morning to you all. Firstly, I pay my respects to the traditional owners of this place and also of all First Nations people of Australia whose lands were taken unlawfully. And I am a beneficiary of the same. My accent reveals where I'm from. I'm Scottish. I came to Australia in 1980. My upbringing in Scotland involved zero tolerance for racism, an attitude to which I uphold. I've been a legal practitioner in this jurisdiction for 39 years, coming up for 40. I was appointed as Crown Prosecutor in 1987 for 5 years, becoming a Senior Crown Prosecutor, where I prosecuted many murder cases and appeal cases. I then went from there to becoming the Solicitor in charge of what is now known as NAJA. It was then NALAS, so that was the principal lawyer for the legal service here. And I was in that position for 5 years, involving much court work, involving many homicide trials, and you name it, I was in every court for 5 years. Following that, I went to the Independent Bar, where I've been ever since. In 2010, I was appointed Senior Counsel, so I've been Senior Counsel for 16 years. I've been former President of the NT Bar Association, a Director of the Law Council of Australia. I've been the former President of the Criminal Lawyers Association here in the Northern Territory. My professional practice has involved extensively representing Aboriginal boys, girls, men, women, organisations. I was personal lawyer to the deceased Galarrwuy Yunupingu for over 5 years, and also to the Reverend Gondara from Elcho Island. So I've been able and privileged to pick up a lot of Indigenous and customary law, and of course its interface with our law. My view on this subject is that it is the most important subject I can think of in this jurisdiction, because it's inevitably aligned to the most important subject, which is reconciliation for this nation. The sad news is that in the 40 years I've been here practicing law, working with and for Aboriginal people in all of our courts, the level of racism has increased astronomically, and in particular in the last 10 to 15 years. And it's very evident on all the cases that have come out over the years, many of which I've been personally involved. As this has occurred, it's no doubt concomitant and attached to the fact that the legal system of which I am a member, and as a Senior Counsel I owe a great responsibility and duty to the administration of justice. I've watched this legal system in the Northern Territory turn into chaos and dysfunction, and it's currently in the process of collapsing. It's a hoax. It would be good, I know it's not possible, probably logistically, if the lot of you went down to the local court here and spent half an hour watching what is supposed to be a court process. And a court process in this jurisdiction requires centrally due process. There is now no due process in the Northern Territory in the local court, which deals with the vast majority of cases. Due process is quintessential to fairness and the production of justice, and it doesn't exist anymore. And of course, 80% plus of the traffic that's going through that court is black, Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nations, whatever the right word is today. And therefore, I witness and have been involved in the deterioration of due process. Thus, Indigenous people do not receive due process. And the consequence of that is inevitable. and on purpose, and that is a massive rise in the incarceration levels of Indigenous people in this jurisdiction. This jurisdiction has the second highest incarceration level on the planet. I think El Salvador beats us, which is just a political junta. The incarceration levels in this jurisdiction are an absolute bloody disgrace and arguably the greatest shame on this entire nation. Because not only do we have the highest imprisonment rates in this jurisdiction, up to 90% of them are black. That is astonishing. That is unbelievable. That is intolerable. And yet I have watched in 20, 30, 40 years, I've watched it increase. And it's now going through the roof. And it's unsustainable. Unsustainable. It cannot continue like this. And there is no means by which any government is realistically trying to address it. So the data is all important. You need to appreciate this. This jurisdiction does not enjoy now the rule of law, due process, separation of powers is questionable. And what we have now is a gulag, a massive gulag here in Darwin and Alice Springs. And the gulag is overcrowded. Therefore, the conditions that are enjoyed by all these Aboriginal men and women are unlawful. And yet we have courts, judicial officers in courts, legal practitioners prosecuting and representing people involved in a process which is landing Aboriginal people into unlawful conditions. And they all know about it, and they should know about it if they don't know about it. So it's a disaster area.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Appreciate you sharing some opening words with us. We'll now proceed to questions, and I might begin with Senator Thorpe.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence, for appearing today. We've heard from a lot of witnesses around their experience of racism in the Northern Territory, but also from those that have witnessed the racism in this territory. But we've had no departments rock up. No one from the Northern Territory government come and appear to provide evidence. Given that they are the perpetrators in this case, what's your view on their absence of being part of this inquiry?
Pathetic, unbelievable, disgraceful. I'm paying their wages. They're insulting me as a citizen. They're insulting you as an important federal committee. And by their absence, they can be found guilty. The reason they're not here is they don't want to be subjected to any type of questioning. They don't want to answer questions about the police force, which has become a racist force with compelling evidence about the same. They don't want to answer questions about the Corrections Department, which is unlawfully holding Aboriginal people. They don't want to answer any questions about the conduct of judicial officers and legal practitioners in condoning this and being participants in the same. Make no mistake, this legal system up here now has become, in my opinion, and you have heard my qualifications, it's a jailing machine. The Darwin local court, the Alice Springs local court, is nothing but a jailing machine. It is not a court of law. And that distresses me personally. I've actually been in court observing things that purport to be process, and at times I begin to feel physically ill watching what goes down. And that is that happens to be just a normal human reaction. Because for some reason I seem to have retained my humanity, notwithstanding I've been in this jailing machine for now decades. But I look around me and I see colleagues who have been, guess what, normalised. They all think it's normal. I look at kids coming up through the Aboriginal Legal Service or the Prosecution Service, and they're all running around daft, thinking they're doing legal process. They're not. And they don't know any better. And they don't have any experienced lawyers in their stable to teach them, like I had 30, 40 years ago. They've got nobody to turn to. So they don't actually know the extent of their participation. They have become enablers to a jailing machine. And it's something that the Aboriginal Legal Service has to seriously look at, I would suggest, as to whether they want to continue to participate in a machine which is the opposite of due process. If they think they're doing their clients a favour by turning up and making yet another unsuccessful bail application, they maybe should look again, because maybe they should consider withdrawing from this jailing machine so that some action can occur. This jurisdiction has in filing cabinets and shelves countless royal commissions of inquiry, coronial inquests, reviews, all of them with substantial evidence-based recommendations which are sound and solid, and they sit in that filing cabinet. Hardly any of them, if any, have been implemented because there is no will in this jurisdiction from either the Labour government or the current CLP government to really address what is wickedry, that being racism. Zero tolerance, I was brought up, and I maintain it. And this country needs to prosecute zero tolerance. This jurisdiction needs to prosecute zero tolerance. Individuals need to appreciate the damage, the harm, the hurt, the pain that racism causes to the subjects of it. And I don't think, dare I say, with my Scottish accent, I really question whether Australians, non-Aboriginal Australians, non-Indian Australians, non-Sri Lankan Australians, I don't think they really appreciate how wicked racism is. And that's hardly any wonder, bearing in mind the heritage of this country. So it's not in a way being critical, it's perhaps only but reasonable and understandable. That if your heritage as a white Australian is 3, 4, 5 generations of this country's history, it may have a different approach to the level of wickedry that racism presents.
Thank you. Very well put. For the benefit of the committee, can you describe the typical life trajectory of a young person you represent? What is the effect of a young person being transferred and locked up, sometimes thousands of kilometres from their family and their home and country?
Well, this happens on a regular basis. Perhaps I could tell you the story of one client I represented who was involved in the Don Dale case. And let me just remind the committee of the Don Dale case, which emerged 10 years ago. And that case revealed, thanks to the ABC revealing it, that Aboriginal children, and I should say while I'm on this point, the adults in prisons here are 90% Indigenous. Juveniles that are detained are 100% Indigenous. This is what we're talking about. This is a disaster. This shouldn't be allowed. This shouldn't be countenanced. And yet it's been continuing for decades while the governments, the public service, the police, the lawyers turn a blind eye. What was on the news yesterday? The government who didn't turn up here were doing the old or the new political trick, which is don't look at racism, which happens to be a cancer. Don't worry about racism. We're going to open up data centres. Data centres, fracking, the future, productivity, jobs. What you're dealing with is more important because it is a cancer. It's a blight on this country like no other. So to go back to Don Dale, when I was the boss at Aboriginal Legal Aid, I would go to Don Dale in the 90s and the early 21st century. And then it was a pretty good detention centre for kids. The kids were kept in rooms, not cells. They had classrooms. They had education rooms. They had regular education. It was what a detention centre should be when dealing with children. Children. It became a war zone It became a gulag, it became overcrowded, and the government chose, during the 2010 period, to arm it with guards who were not youth workers anymore, but were security guards, serious prison officers taken from the Burma prison. And all hell let loose. Now, what the ABC discovered, that these Aboriginal children were being tortured physically and psychologically by the regime that existed in there. And praise the Lord, it went on ABC. Australia went mad for 48 hours. Malcolm Turnbull did something as Prime Minister, which was establish the Royal Commission of Inquiry. We had hope then, 10 years ago. We thought, well, this might improve things. This might expose the reality here. And what it exposed was horrendous treatment of children. And again, children, our most precious commodity, which the law demands are treated in an appropriate manner. And yet, in this jurisdiction, in 2016, it was discovered that these children were being tortured, kept in isolation, being physically bashed, being psychologically bashed. One of the kids was referred to in the Royal Commission as AD. He was 14 years of age. I ended up representing him at the Royal Commission. And his story says a lot about perhaps answering your question, Senator Thorpe. He was born in Tennant Creek. His father was from Borroloola. His mother was from Tennant Creek. The relationship was light, if I can put it like that. And his mother had a problem with alcohol. The father split, moving up to Borroloola, leaving it with the mother, who couldn't cope. As often has happened in the last 10 to 20 years, AD's grandmother, the mother of the mother, who lived here in Darwin and Palmerston, stepped in to save the day, and she adopted him. And she brought him up in her house in Palmerston. And he was a good kid. He went to school. He was good at football. He was well liked. His grandmother had a strict household. She was partnered, as it happened, by a Scottish guy. And she had a lot of adopted children from her other children, a lot of adopted grandchildren. AD got a bit sick of the tightness and the discipline, so he drifted into another family house, which is in the same suburb. That led him into company with older boys. That led him to skipping school. That led him going to Casuarina shopping centre. That led him to shoplifting from sports shops. He was eventually chased away, eventually arrested. Charges were laid. And within months, because he was Aboriginal, and he didn't have the support mechanisms that non-Indigenous kids have, within literally months, because he hadn't answered his bail, because he was still on the prowl with these other lads, he goes into the detention centre. And he was in the detention centre for a couple of months when he was placed in isolation. He was 14 years of age. Some people call that a bush Aboriginal. From the centre, from the desert. He was placed in isolation in a thing called the Behavioural Management Unit, a cell 3x3. It consisted of one toilet pan, no toilet seat, one mattress, one pillow on the floor, no table, no chairs, no sink, no ablutions, no hygiene. And he was kept in that 3x3 on his own, a 14-year-old. It was hot. Of course it was hot. There was no air conditioning. There was no fan in that cell. He was kept in there for 16 days. Every day he cried. Every day he shouted out, "Why am I in here? When am I coming out?" Nobody knew. Nobody answered because nobody knew. The system was chaos. The system was dysfunctional. It's reflected in our court system now. We're virtually the same. He was in there for 16 days, and eventually, through good fortune, a guard forgot to lock his door, and he managed to get out into a courtyard adjacent, where he was seen on film in the Four Corners documentary Australia's Shame, where he got a light fitting and he was smashing everything up and going emotionally charged. "Where am I, Bruz? How do I get out of here, Bruz?" He was going off his head. He was off his head. Corrections had driven him off his head. He was 14. Let's move forward. He eventually was released from there. Four Corners hit the airwaves as a Royal Commission set up. And I found AD at home in Tennant Creek. Unfortunately for him, he received the stigma of his mates in Tennant Creek, because he agreed to give evidence at the Royal Commission, which was a brave step. He received the stigma of the police force in Tennant Creek as well, but he gave evidence, and he was cross-examined, and he told his story. And then he was spat out, like all these Royal Commissions do, like all these court cases do. He was put on a Greyhound bus to return to Tennant Creek. And he did what I knew he would do. He did what I would have put my house on what he was going to do. He got back on the street with kids, and he got into chase situations with police. And he gets chased, and he gets caught, and he resists arrest, and he's charged with 4 police assaults. And he gets off 3 of them, and he goes down on 1. And then he gets a suspended jail sentence. And then he gets out, and then he goes back on the chase. And he eventually goes to jail. And then he becomes 18, and he eventually goes to the adult jail. And that's the life of AD, a First Nations young man. A great kid. He could have done anything. But he was destined to end up in prison because of the lifestyle that he personifies and is oh so typical. Now, guess what? 10 years later, it's worse. The education, he had a good education. He went to high school here and he did well. Out in the bush and even in the city now, the education department, the health department, all of these things are going through that floor. They're all deteriorating. The education system is a shambles. The education that I received by Aboriginal kids is negligible. If you're not educated, you're disabled. You might as well have one arm. You're really vulnerable. If you can't comprehend English, if you haven't been taught English, if you can't write, if you can't read, you're in big trouble. You're handicapped. And that's what's happening in this jurisdiction. And it's all connected. It's all interconnected. A jurisdiction that's in free fall. So I hope that answers your question. But that guy
Very well.
is growing in numbers.
Yes.
Growing in numbers.
I just want to ask my final question, and if you could just keep it short and sharp, because I know that
Because,
others
yeah,
want
other
to
committee members have got
question.
questions
But
as well.
Of course.
is
And
this
we've only got you for another couple of minutes. So.
is this the 21st century genocide, sophistication of genocide to wipe out Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory?
That's a political question, Senator. And I'm not
I'm
a
a politician.
But I know the definition of genocide. And it could be very strongly argued that what's going on here is genocide. But I'm not a politician. I'm a lawyer. I represent people in the legal system. And this legal system ain't a system anymore. And racism is going through the roof. Let me just tell you about racism going through the roof, please, because this is the centre of your inquiry. Racism has been rising in this country for 20 years at least, and it's accelerating. And a good example might be this. In 1989, the first Anzac Day game was played. Is anybody here from Victoria? Right, so you know about AFL, Anzac Day. The first one, it was a draw, Essendon Collingwood. During the game, Michael Long was reported for attacking Monkhouse, the Collingwood ruckman. When it came out in the wash, Michael Long explained to his representatives that for some reason I just lost it. He called me a fucking black cunt. And he said, I've been called that for years. But somehow or other, I just snapped that day and attacked him. He explained that. They explained it to the VFL Tribunal. They explained it to Monkhouse. They explained it to Collingwood Football Club. And virtually everybody in Australia in 1989 supported Michael Long, sympathised with Michael Long, thought it was understandable and reasonable. Monkhouse agreed with Michael Long. It brought in the racial vilification laws because of what Michael Long revealed in the racist taunt that he received. That was Australia in 1989. Fast forward, Adam Goodes, 2015. Same caper, really. Adam Goodes gets into trouble because he called out someone who was calling him with a racial taunt. Called him a gorilla or something like that. Unfortunately for Adam, which he didn't know at the time and explained fully the next day, it was a 14-year-old girl. When all that came out in the wash, this country was different then, 2015. He didn't get any support from Australian rural football supporters. He was hounded. He was hounded into retirement. One of Australia's greatest athletes, two-time Brownlow medal winner, for goodness sake. And the Australian community turned on him like a beast, because that's what racists are. Beasts, horrible people, dangerous people, causing horrible injury and harm to innocent people. He had to retire. So there's a good example of how racism has been increasing. Now look what we've got. Look at the Kumanjai Walker inquest into the death of that kid that was shot by Rolf. Part of the evidence that flowed out of that were these incredible text messages sent between the police officers that attended on the day. And their language was revealing how they referred to Aboriginal people, calling them bush coons, niggers, Neanderthals. And I use these words deliberately. I know they're offensive, and if it's offending you, then I'm sorry, but so be it, because I think it needs to come on the record. This is what regular police officers are using to refer to Aboriginal people. And they got caught doing that. Everybody knows who they were. Everybody knows what they said. And apart from Rolf, all of them are still in the police force. Now, what is going on in this country? Do you think for one moment a police officer in the United Kingdom using language like that would stay in employment? There would be absolutely no chance. He would be sacked. But the fact that they haven't been sacked reflects the level of racism that's now become acceptable in this country. Now, does that answer that question?
Yes, I'm handballing it over that way now.
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. We only do have a very brief few minutes left out because our next witnesses are here, but I might go to each of the committee members just for one question, and if I can invite you to be brief in your responses so we can get to our next witnesses, that would be greatly appreciated. And there's also an opportunity to respond to questions on notice as well. So if there's anything you wish to add to the evidence you've given today, you can definitely write to us. Mr. G.
The longevity of my answers is because of the importance of this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't disagree with you. Yeah. Mr. G.
Thank you for your evidence, Mr. Lawrence. It's going to be hard to give a short answer to this, I feel, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In your opening remarks, you referred to the unlawful holding of Aboriginal people in unlawful conditions.
Yeah.
Are you able to briefly explain to the committee and for others who are listening what you meant by that?
Yeah, the conditions that prisoners are subjected to and have been for the last couple of years, which involves large periods of isolation due to lockdowns because prison officers are either on strike or they're not available. They haven't got the staff or the resources.
Yep.
So a large number of prisoners, in fact all prisoners, are subjected to large periods in isolation. Not only that, they're in overcrowded conditions.
Yep.
Sleeping on the floor in reception. They've occupied all the police watch houses, which is sleeping on the floor like sardines in a tin. All of these conditions are unlawful, contrary to international law, to which Australia is a party, contrary to national law, where there are national conventions and rules governing the conditions of prisoners, and also contrary to Northern Territory rules.
Thank you. And lastly, this committee sent invitations to the Children's Commissioner, the Department of Child Protection, Health, Housing, Police and the Attorney General's Department to appear before this committee. And there was either no response or they declined to appear. In your view, does demonstrate a contempt for the processes of the Australian Parliament?
Strictly speaking, legally, I don't know, because they haven't been subpoenaed and so forth, but it's definitely contemptuous, in my view. Definitely. Without a doubt. And as I said earlier, I mean, I'm being personal now, but I'm paying for these guys. They should be here advising the most important parliament in the nation. And by refusing, it's contemptuous.
It's the avoidance of scrutiny as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you can find them guilty ex parte. You know, there's a principle in law, I don't know if there's any lawyers in here, but there's a principle in law, Jones versus Dunkel, which is if you're expected to turn up in a court case and give evidence and you don't, then your absence can be viewed in a negative way. And you could do that now.
Thank you.
And you should.
Thank you, Mr. G. Mr. Venning.
Chair, if I could just reflect on that and your comments just now. I just want to remind you and the committee that we've also been in South Australia and in Western Australia with significant Indigenous populations, and we've received no evidence from the police or departments in either of those jurisdictions. And in fact, this committee was essentially established off the back of the bombing, the bombing in the terrorist attack, attempted terrorist attack in Australia at 20.
In Perth, yeah.
So we've received no evidence from those departments either, and they are both under Labor governments. And I'm concerned this has become a bit of a witch hunt here the last couple of days against this new CLP government. But I'd just like to remind you that we've had a Labor government here from 26 to 24, and we've got a federal Labor government, and we're seeing the targets go backwards in nearly all of the closing the gap targets.
The what?
The closing the gap targets federally, most of them are going backwards. So
Yeah.
I just want to put that on the record. I won't ask my question in the interest of time, but it was around.
Was that a question or just a statement?
Just a statement off the back of what you said earlier.
Well, I'm not interested in that statement, and that can go on the record.
Sure.
This is about racism. This is more important than making political points. Do you
agree.
have got any idea how wicked racism is? Do you know what the damage it does to people? I've been representing generations of Aboriginal people that because of racism, I haven't met an Aboriginal person, say from the Stolen Generation, that isn't in some way fractured. And it's because they've been the victim of racism. That's why when I was brought up by my father and my house and my street and my school, that you eradicate racism. You don't do it. If you see it, you get rid of it because it's wicked. That my father was a member of the Greatest Generation. The Greatest Generation are called that because they were the ones that were prepared to take up arms against the fascist, racist regime that was threatening the entire Western world. And that's why he did it. And I remember asking him, saying, Dad, why did you leave your secure employment? He worked in the shipyards. He didn't have to leave his work, but he says, we needed to do it to defeat fascism, and also, watch this, we knew what they were doing to the Jews. He knew it was racist. That's why I come with zero tolerance. And that's why I hope this committee can perhaps make recommendations that can be followed, that can attack racism. And I've got some ideas on what can be done in that regard. Yeah. If you're interested.
Yeah, so I think that will be helpful for the committee,
Yeah.
but due to time, we might get you to provide those on notice to the committee, if you can.
I want to give them now. I want to give them right now. I'm here. I've come out of my practice. It's short notice.
Sure.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
We have Larrakia people waiting to appear next. So with all due respect, can you please put those recommendations on notice? Because we're limited in time.
All right.
And we've got Larrakia mob sitting behind you waiting to appear.
Three. He's given us
Oh, that was so cheeky. Okay, 3 minutes.
three. No.
There's no way he's saying, please.
You okay? Right. Because racism is such a serious thing, this government should think about setting up an independent office that attacks racism, like the independent office of the Crime Commission or the independent director of public prosecution. It should be fully funded from a source that's never questionable. It should be manned by the appropriately qualified and experienced people whose purpose and aim is to eradicate racism. They should put a whiteboard up in their office on day one and write 25 years. And they should write number 1, education, education, education. Because we all know, don't we, readers, that there actually is no such thing as race. We're all cut from the same genetic cloth. The differences in colour of your skin to mine are just differences in colour of skin. There's no difference between you and I. We're human beings. You're not another, and I'm not another to you. Scientists have told us that now for decades. So there's no such thing as race. Now, that's the kind of thing that should be put in every school curriculum for a start. And then, of course, you've got the history of racism and the damage it's done, whether in this country, the United States, Greece, you name it, there's been slavery forever. So I think that this country, if it really wants to get rid of racism, if it's got the will to stop it increasing and start reducing it, then it should be fair dinkum about setting up an independent department that does nothing but eradicate racism in the community. And it can be done. And it will take 25 years. So be it.
Thank you very much for your time this
Thank
morning,
you, Eric.
and for giving up your and for coming ahead of time on short notice.
That's all right.
Appreciate that absolutely. That concludes the questions we have. I think you'll get some questions on notice from committee members.
No dramas.
But any additional information and any questions on notice, if you can please forward your responses to the Secretariat by the 6th of August.
Happy to.
And you'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence from today. And if you find any errors in there, you can request corrections to those errors.
Thank you for that.
And we will now suspend for 30 seconds while we welcome our next witnesses. Thank you so much, Mr. Lawrence. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Eric Fijo to give evidence, and additional representatives to give evidence today and support people, but I might, while nameplates are being written on, get each of you to state your full name and the capacity in which you appear. So as individual community members or, yeah.
Joe Brown.
Joe
and
Brown.
I'm here supporting Erectus.
Yep, thank you.
You're supporting me, Joe?
I'm Nathan Sench. I'm here to support Heritage.
I'm James Swan. I've been to the Olympics twice, Atlanta and the Sydney Olympics, and I'm here to support Uncle James.
Thank you. Now I've got a bit of a spiel to read out, and then I'll invite you to make an opening statement. Yeah. So although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard, who's sitting over here, and attracts parliamentary privilege and is being broadcast live as well on our Parliament's website, and we also have media in the room this afternoon, or this morning. I'll now invite you to make an opening statement, and then we can we'll proceed to questions. Each of the committee members can ask a question.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to go through such an important matter. Thank my cousins, my brother and my nephew for coming here to support us, noting that each one of us represent 20 or 50 other people, if not more. So because of the circumstance here, I'd also like it noted that we're in this building and not in a government building. Paspali, in particular, I've got nothing nice to say about them. I've been up here for a long time and in big business with Pearling in particular, and they've been exclusive and using us for a long time. I can touch on a bit, but let's get that out. I'd also like to touch on some of the stuff that I heard just recently with John Lawrence, who I've got high regard for. He's been a lawyer up here from the 80s. I've known him for a long time. And all the madness that he has to go through representing us. So last one, I'd like to note that I heard about contempt from this particular government. Well, they're showing it in spades. They're showing it in spades, contempt. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fijo.
I'll go on now. I've given my submission.
Yep.
I'd like to read my submission, even if I haven't heard what I've got to say.
Sure.
And I'm glad that this is being recorded, and I hope that the Chief Minister and Ilka got big ears and they can listen, and I know that they won't take any notice, but introduction. This is my submission inquiring into racism, hate, violence directed at Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people. I submitted this in May 2026. Introduction. I was born at the old Darwin Hospital, just down the road, in 1964. I've never lived more than 20 miles from where I was born. There. I'm a larrikia. Like my father and his brothers, I've walked this whole country. Being a larrikia, we are brought up knowing who our people are, who our community is, whether that's black, white or brindle. Darwin is unique because we are made up of all different nationalities and religions. It's a melting pot. As a larrikia, following the steps of my father and his brothers, we make it our business to know who's who. Cyclone Tracy changed everything, and that disaster and the subsequent breaking away of the Northern Territory from South Australia destroyed the territory as I knew it. Before Cyclone Tracy, everybody was welcoming. It was only the authorities behind their high fences that were exclusive. The rest of this multicultural community was inclusive. In 1978, following the separation from South Australia, a mass of people came up from the southern states, and they had completely different values to what I have known. The values that they brought with them were based on the idea that everything is theirs. I worked as a delivery driver, dropping off orders for all sorts of small businesses. I was taught that when I dispatched the orders, I should do it as if I were fulfilling the orders for myself. I also worked as a surveyor's assistant, a chainman, for 4 years, with my father, who did it for 30 years. We cut the roads and made the suburbs, and we trailblazed all new virgin country, especially in the Greater Darwin region. The 1976 Land Rights Act played a major role in my family's story, and that of all other First Nations people in the Territory. It wasn't until decades later that I found out the true story on why the states never got the Land Rights Act. When I sat down with MUA and Waterside Workers Federation comrades that had been in the room with Gough Whitlam and the staunch Labor people from the 1970s, early 1970s. The Northern Territory is unique because we have the 1976 Land Rights Act. Among other things, it created the land councils, including the Northern Land Council, which operated for nearly 10 years as a sole council. My mother's young brother, my uncle, was an inaugural member of the Northern Land Council. I was blessed and privileged to go along to full council meetings just down the road here at Uniting Church in Darwin because of this. Every one of those representatives spoke English as their last language. It wasn't until the 1980s that the Tiwi Land Council, the Allendiliagua Land Council, broke away and the Central Land Council was formed, all because of the temptation of the mighty dollar. This mighty dollar swayed a lot of strong people and influenced them on breaking away from our religion. This is a disease that colonisation has brought. The reality and situation we face in the Northern Territory. We are still a colony of the English Crown. Today I'm more worried than ever that this colony and the Crown have been infested by corporate greed. Around the world, and particularly here in the Northern Territory, these influences and the people that caretake this ideology have enacted for centuries a plan to divide and conquer. These plans to divide and conquer are based on the arrogance and ideology of people like Charles Darwin, after whom my ancestral lands are named, and called us the missing link. These issues addressed by this inquiry are therefore institutionalised and intergenerational. The tight circles of power, influence that these type of beings live and breathe is also intergenerational. The whole mentality of this colony has never been to accept First Nations people. This colony and the ideology it brings with it is therefore based on oppression. This ideology constitutes a form of contemporary colonialism. Colonialism did not just happen back in the past. It manifests and continues to manifest in various ways. Incarceration has been a colonial method of dominating and subordinating Indigenous peoples. Settler colonialism is persistent and is ongoing today. The bastard colonial Westminster system has been compromised with a bastard corporate system, and the authorities under these systems / political leaders are finishing off what this country did to First Nations people. This began with dispossession, continued with stealing the children, and continues with rewriting their own history and their own laws. All the unfinished businesses that have been deliberately forgotten about is still there. All the hard yards, the struggles that strong First Nation leaders in this region got brutalised for, locked up for, has been forgotten about by them, deliberately. The justice system has worked for them, but has failed us because it is a deliberate mechanism of oppression. Incarceration rates in the Northern Territory are screaming this. The justice system the bastard ideology of this Chief Minister led to the situation where, at the swearing-in of the so-called Territory Administrator, she used her bastard authority to stop other elected representatives from attending the ceremony. This says it all. The bastard ideology of this Chief Minister and her acolytes imported 200 foreigners to come to this country to become thugs in uniform as their own personal police protection. The police motto in the Northern Territory is to serve and protect. I asked the question, to serve who and protect who? I worked at Her Majesty's Prison at Berrima Jail for 10 years. I worked in maximum security for 5 years. I was in the inaugural Tactical Response Group of the Northern Territory with the police and prison officers for over 2 years. There were no deaths on my watch. At that time, the conduct of prison officers leaned more towards humanity and the love of it. I was very good at my job, very good. Back then, for young people incarcerated at 18, they had an 8 to 12% chance of ending up back in detention or committing suicide, which I may add is not in no First Nation language that I know of. It's a new phenomenon, suicide. It's not in any Aboriginal language. Today, that percentage under the same rules is over 85%. This is a bloody national disgrace. And this Chief Minister and her acolytes have no shame. They still want to lock us up. It seems that there are no coincidences in the fact that the major news outlets in the Northern Territory are owned by corporate bodies and individuals that have no regard for human life, especially First Nations peoples. To say we're up against it is an understatement. The blatant disregard of accountability says everything about this country. The blatant double standards are a national disgrace. I was here when the repertoire for the United Nations, a woman from the Philippines, travelled around this whole country like you might be doing. She came to Darwin and she sat down with us and the Aboriginal Peak Organisation of Northern Territory, APONT, at Larrakia Nation, where it is now in Coconut Grove, and asked us, as grassroots leaders, do you support Australia being on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations? And to a letter, every one of us said no. Every one of us, to a letter. The repertoire went down to New South Wales. And I heard later the superintendent of the New South Wales prisons would not let her into even one prison. She left the country, and to my utter surprise and disgust, she supported Australia being on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. Was she paid anything? See, people seem to change their direction when they get a carrot put in front of them. I've been fighting for recognition and my identity all my life. The Northern Land Council and this bastard system has let us down. I had 2 federal courts agree with me that Northern Land Council does not follow governments. The Northern Land Council took me to the High Court. the High Court judges shit themselves because they couldn't count enough zeros for compensation. So they instructed the Native Title Registrar to instruct the Northern Land Council not to sign any further Indigenous land use agreements until this problem was solved. And it's still not solved today. Solutions. The barriers to them. What has kept me sane these last several years is that I have some authority under this Westminster system through the Aboriginal Sacred Sites Act 1989, Northern Territory. Under the Act, I'm an acknowledged custodian of all Larrakia sacred sites for the last 27 years, and also of the very first registered sacred site in the country, Larrakia Barracks, the men's ceremony ground just down the road. One of the purposes for over millennia of the ceremony ground has been to teach young men, not necessarily Larrakia, how to behave appropriately in society. I've spoken to all senior defence personnel, uniform and civilian. I've spoken to senior police, including the ex-police commissioner, who she sacked, as well as judges, including the Chief Judge Elizabeth Morris, and all the peak Aboriginal bodies to get their blessings and support. I've been working to establish Project Magma, a cultural youth diversionary program, because I am acutely aware of what the statistics are. It took us 14 months to come up with a 5-week program, which included past prison officers, current prison officers, top footballers, top rugby league players, basketballers, boxers, and motivators, some of whom are no longer with us physically. This has been initiated by me and other grassroots community leaders. Despite all the work that has gone into developing this project, all the bureaucracy has done has made us chase our own tail. For every day, every week, every month, every year, that one of my countrymen in the Northern Territory turns 18, they've got an 85% chance of never seeing daylight again. This is a national disgrace, and everyone should be ashamed of it, including yous. I put my hand up to do this work, and I've been shit on by people that have paid good money to make this happen. They just want to get their paycheck and live their lives in an illusion. As a Larrakia elder and community leader, I've been denied my cultural authority on my own country, and no one seems to care. At every opportunity, I've opposed wrongful acts taken by people in authority, whether by senior government figures, peak NGO bodies, elected councils, governments, or representatives that are supposed to be for the people. I see it very clearly that these people are now lackeys for lobby groups. Most of them do not care about their electorates and the people that they are supposed to represent. This is very concerning to me, because in the future, our youth will learn from how these people do their business. The cycle of intergenerational colonialism is alive and flourishing. My name is Eric Fijo, Horninmill. I was born flora and fauna. My sovereignty has never been ceded, and I am a Larrakia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Vidro, for that very powerful opening statement.
This is important matter. It's important.
Absolutely.
It's about racism, like what's his name, John Lawrence, what he said before, what I heard him. I don't know what you mob going to do. Sorry to interrupt. I don't know what you mob are going to do, what actions. This is the third set in the inquiry I've been to here in my own country. Okay? One for Middle Arm, one for Dondale, and this one. So I don't know what you mob get paid. You mob need to do your job. And this federal government, Labor government, you mob had a landslide win. You've had a landslide win. You can make decisions like that, and you haven't. I was a full-time Labor supporter, Maritime Union, Workers' Federation, Comrade, and we've been shit on. I've got no apologies to nobody, especially that piece of work, Chief Minister. Trash.
Thank you very much. We'll proceed to questions,
Please,
if that's okay
ask
with
me
you.
anything you want.
And we'll begin with Senator Thorpe, and the other committees might also have some questions too. Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Eric, for your statement. And as a sovereign Larrakia elder, it's an honour to have you appear today. I want to ask about the significance of the Northern Territory Chief Minister appointing David Connolly as the NT Administrator, and I want to know what message does it send to Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory to appoint a character with a very shady racist past. How do people feel here about this new administrator, David Connolly?
Thank you, Senator. I'll try my best to answer you. Look, human nature, I understand that, a lot of mine, especially my age group, we've been kicked on, stomped on and pushed around and bullied and shit on, and my age group and a bit older, they've just had enough, So this, I understand, when they tell me, oh, Eric, you're still doing that, leave it, why don't you just go with the flow? Nothing we can do, so, and that's one of the good things about, at this stage, I don't know how it's going to go because all the Zionist lobbies and all that shit, but then they're stopping the freedom of speech, but I've got executive privilege like him or what? Thank you.
You've got parliamentary privilege.
Yeah, thank you. So, on that point, these my peers and loved ones, I see the hurt in their eyes, and then, unfortunately, the younger mob, like I mentioned in my statement here, Senator, that they don't know any better. They're like monkeys. Monkeys see, monkey do, and they see these people and I don't like bagging mine. I really don't. We get enough shit from everybody else, but this point needs to be made is because our youth, they see these people in our own people in these organisations that walk around with something stuck up their bloody arse or whatever, and they forget about us. They forget about who they are because they in their mind they've made it. And our youth, I'm trying to get to answer your question properly. So our youth, they think that this is how we do our business, like I said here, and so they go with that, and they don't know otherwise because, like I witnessed just last week with 50 years of NAIDOC week, surviving and still here, and this piece of work, getting on social media for flag raising, and then going to the Saturday night ball, and then I don't even leave my front gate, and then I'm getting all people texting me and emailing me, telling me about, on her social media. She's putting up all on her social media, all photos with all my countrymen, with big smiles on their face. Stupid idiots. They're dumb and they don't realise what they're doing because they're giving her ammunition and she's using it against us. So in regards to this piece of work, administrator, we've got Darwin small enough. He's a bigot to the core. So I've got my nephews are from Darrakia Nation. They asked me, I got a message how we work up here at Bush Telegraph, He wanted me to go and meet him over here at his residence or whatever that residence over here, Admiralty House, you know. That will never happen while I'm breathing. Why I want to meet a person like that? So, you know, this people like my age group and a bit older that have been around and right in front, you know, what's right in front of us, it's just disgraceful. And the actions of this bloke and the actions of her, in one hand she's getting photos and flag raising and all the photos on social media. In the other hand, she's got one of her elected MLAs to bully my niece, who was a child's commissioner, who she just resigned last Thursday. A disgraceful act on them pushing her to resign. And then I just found out this morning, as I do, Senators, that I've just found out that she's stopping funding for 400 people with illnesses at a fund. I don't know what it is, I don't know, but I just got the email this morning, and she's cut funding for this organisation. And then not just all First Nation, there's a few non-Indigenous as well. So that's the type of ilk, and the type of ilk that she handpicked this person, because that, like the federal Labor, Territory CLP country had landslide win. So unlike Territory Labor, like this Albanese, whatever he calls himself, you know, shit on us, shit on me and mine. Unlike them, Labor Party, Federal Labor, this CLP party has followed through and pushed everything, shitting on First Nations, all the hard yards we've done. And that bloke is a piece of work. You know, he's down. The Territory is a small place, you know, and the Territory is not easy. I mentioned before in other Senate inquiries, a lot of viciousness and blood and really, really nasty things happen. And this Chief Minister was right in the thick of it. He's as guilty as sin, and she's right there. So I hope that, to the best of my ability, answers your question, Senator.
I'm happy to pass the call, Chair.
Yeah, sure. Mr Chair.
Yep, I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about Project Mangma and some of the
Thank you,
difficulties you've encountered.
Senator Gee. Appreciate that. So magma is larynx for grey hair. So grey hair is associated with wisdom and knowledge. Yeah. So you can't have wisdom and knowledge unless you have reason and bloody common sense. And there's none of that going around at the moment. Okay? There's no reason and common sense going around because she's deliberately making it happen with her acolytes. Okay? And so, with my background, like I said, and the unacceptable suicide rates in incarceration, with my unique access to my senior military, and I've had to learn, Senator, I've had to learn the difference between uniform and civilian, which is chalk and cheese. So I'll just leave it at that because I've got a meeting with them coming up soon, but I call them numbers. I'm up to number 14, Senator Gee, okay, as a bureau person from Defence. And I've had to really work out the difference between uniform and civilian. And Darwin City is a garrison town. It was based in garrison town. My family has history with Defence, particularly Army and Larrakia Barracks. So, you know, the uniqueness of the territory with the 76 Land Rights Act and the 89 Sacred Sites. So we've spent a lot of time, and like I said, I'm up to number 40 now, bureau person from Defence. I've got, we signed an agreement a number of years ago when Labor Party was in before this piece of work come in, and we had this thing called local decision making. So a senior bureau person from Defence, Celia Perkins, she asked me face to face with Matt Thistlethwaite at the time. He was for Labor mob, I believe, and that other bloke, useless, little duck, Luke Gosling, that's him. You know, I'd known him. I helped had a vote card for him at a couple of elections, okay? And he shit on me. So I'll reciprocate tenfold to that bloke. So, you know, these mob all know the statistics. You know, you've heard, I mean, John Lawrence here, okay? I known him from before, a long time ago, and even when I was working in Berrimah. So we've just chased our tail, and we haven't had the help we need, and that's just the facts. So, you know, one good thing that keeps me sane, I've got a wonderful board, wonderful board, and one thing that keeps me sane is that I can say honestly, I'll look you mob in the eye, tell you mob, Yous all come and go. Yous all come and go. People like me, we're left to pick up the pieces. So this is my people, my community, our community. So we'll do that. Whether yous help us or not, we'll still do that. So this is what Magma is about, wisdom and knowledge, and how we've got to walk hand to hand together. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. You know, you might be only here for a couple of days, you're travelling all around the country, good luck to you. You know, but please, show a bit of humanity. You know, look in the mirror and look yourself in the eye in the mirror and try and smile. And try accept who you are. Because, you know, there's other people going on, and that's the wonderful thing about this country. Is, you know, what I grew up on is that, how I grew up is that keep the bastards honest. That's how I grew up. You can call a spade a spade. You know, I do that with spades. You know, don't be sooky bubba, take it on the chin. I've had to do that. You know, people like tiptoeing around the tulips and walking on bloody thin ice and glass, and we've got to stop that. So my mother as well, Senator Gee, my mother, as you know, as they do with us, you know, she started the Strong Woman, Strong Baby program. I've lost 3 older siblings to sudden infant death syndrome. So it was always in the back of Mum's mind, because she was from the stolen generation, and as you know, the churches brought the Ten Commandments here to this country, and they broke every one of them. Broke every one of them, the scum. You know. So Mum looked for other answers outside of the church she was in, because if you weren't baptised, you're going to burn in hell, so they said. So because of my 3 other siblings died of cot death and sudden infant death syndrome and all that stuff, so Mum, and it's still operating today, from the late 1980s, they're still operating the Northern Territory Strong Woman, Strong Baby program. And Mum used all my little brothers and nephews and nieces as live practice with all these things, so I won't go into that detail, but, you know, this stuff that keeps us sane, you know. I was lucky I had mother and father in my life, Senator Gee, you know, and not single parent family in it. And I had my uncles and aunties from both sides that surrounded me with love. And like I said, you know, I've walked this whole country barefoot with my father and for work. I know my people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. G. My question is about the magma work too. It sounds like there are real challenges here, and I've heard you articulate those really well and really powerfully. But what is it about this, the program that you spent 14 months creating?
5-week program, perpetual program,
yeah. Can you, like, what is it that's different about that you think that'll make a difference for your mob here?
Well, I never went to university and got PhDs and STDs, Senator. Okay, I never went to university. I went to University of Bush and Life and Hard Knocks. Okay, that's number one. You know, and like I said, you know, we're all grassroots people. We're not professors or academics and all that stuff. Of course we need them. Of course I've got them, you know, in my team. Surround myself with the best people, absolutely. Be mad not to. And that's what I'm blessed to have access to my senior military people in the country. You know, I've got direct lines to them. So, you know, I tell them, you know, I surround myself with the best people and to give us the best possible outcomes for achievements, aims and objectives that we want to do. So, and that's Magna, you know, grey hair, you know. So, you know, I'm not a rocket scientist. I've been around and you know, I'm my mother's and father's son. You know, I have stability with home with my wife. You know, we've been together childhood sweethearts. We've been together 48 years. We've been married in a church. My father's young brother was a reverend in the Uniting Church. We got married in the church just down the road here 36 years ago this September. So, you know, I have stability. My youngest child is 33 now. She just got married last month. So, you know, I've got time on my hands that I can use, and instead of, you know, so easy, you know, like my peers, you know, they just sick of, you know, standing up and being the rock against the flow and just go with the flow, you know. So, you know, this is all about Magma and identity. Identity is really important. You know, a lot of people come to Australia, into this country from boat people, you know, immigrants, and that's what this country has been about. So you know, a lot of them don't know their heritage, their true heritage, and that's not their fault. I understand that, but I do. You know, I'm a bit different, and like I said, I've never lived anywhere else. You know, and the territory is unique. We're not the masses down south, and all the different masses down south, and you know now, you know, I've been asked to be involved with politics and all that shit. You can pay me not enough money on the world to pay me to be a politician. You know, so you know, I give you a little bit of respect for that. Like I tell you, look, you know, I tell you, I give you respect for that. And I ask you honestly, you know, don't forget us, and you know the things that you have sworn to, what you want to do, what you've said, the commitment that you've made, because, man, especially in this mad world now, and you know, with the outside influence like the lobby groups and this particular bloody Zionism shit, scum of the world, you know, that everything's about them. It's nothing's about the First Nations and this country, people, citizens of this country. You know, so, you know, you're not stupid. You're not stupid. You see what's going on. You got conscience. I'm sure you might have conscience. You know, use that to, you know, direct which way you're going to go. You know, that, like I was saying, this I've had to deal with these Bureau people about this Project Magma, and I've said to the, you know, when I said to him, I'm reaching out honourably. I'm going to hold hands and walk hand in hand together for our future. Black, white and blue together, unconditional. I got no, you know, Darwin is made up of all different churches and nationalities and all different religions. How come there's no black colour religion in this country? It's been denied to us. My religion is nature. I found my religion. I know. I walk in two worlds. Okay? That's why I do. That's why I've been acknowledged as senior Larrikey custodian for all Larrikey sacred sites, because I have cultural knowledge. And I've had to learn that. And I never went to university to learn that. I went to our university. We got our Bush University. And we have our rites of passage. And we have our compartments that we've got to go through each compartment to get through to that next compartment. Same everywhere. But that's been taken away from us, and our children, they don't know that because of the history of this country with the stolen generation and the continued denial of it. You know?
Because that was going to be my next question about how do we keep our kids safe and connected to who they are with everything that's going on around them, with the racism, lots of kind of competing interests. How do we keep our kids safe?
Well,
what would be the, I suppose I'm thinking about kind of what comes out at the end of this process. Like if we were to do one thing that you think would be useful, that would have the biggest impact on our kids, what would that be?
you know what that is? You know what that is? That's one drop of water on granite. We'll be persistent. We'll be consistent and persistent. And we can change that granite with patience. It has to start with the youth. Has to start with the youth. And we give them counsel, we give them direction. We start small. So when you look at the 5-week program, we identified 8 participants. So we'll demonstrate. We'll demonstrate with the 8. And because now this piece of work wants to lock up 10-year-olds, what a piece of work it is. Scum of the earth, locking up 10-year-old kids. What type of person does that? Seriously. So we'll do that. She's going to come and go, so we're still going to be here. So we'll address it, and when you look at the 5-week program, we've identified, so we'll do what's in our capacity, and the 5-week program from day one, week 1, to week 5, day 7, the very next day is week 1, day 1. So it's a perpetual program. So when in it, it allows for 92 participants a year over the 12-month period, and it's 24/7. So we allow our camp, and that's another thing, but you know, so and we do similar, like I was saying, I was ex-prisoner, I was working in maximum security, so we've got a journal, so we'll document all our information. We look at these kids, and we look at what their strengths are, we look at what their weaknesses are, and we'll classify them from us taken, with mentors. We've got our senior mentors, junior mentors, then we've got our consultants and cultural consultants for afternoon and evening activities. It's in the program. So we look at their strengths over a period of time, and then, because of having Army, Navy, Air Force, and all their contractors, and then having all government as well, and all the other contractors around town. So, we can identify after a while, and we know that some of them, they might need to come back not once or twice, maybe a few times. So, we can identify them to maybe even coming in as junior mentors, But always got to have two together. Number one is, cover each other's ass, so all that stuff, and document everything. So, so we put a lot of effort in this, man, and it's not unachievable. It's reasonable. We're not asking for much. We're just asking for a fair go, and we're not getting it. Like I said, this piece of work, within the very first week, her election promise was to stop local decision making, and that's what Celia Perkins asked me to do against my better judgment. So I did that against my better judgment. I've got wonderful photos and signed things. I was that emotional. I signed it with, she assigned one of her Vera people to come and work with me to make it happen. John Watling, wonderful man, but he left because he had personal issues, unfortunately. So because of that. So and these kids need it badly, man. And Senator Stewart, what me and my board, we're saying, and we're telling you, and I'll tell you, is that my worst enemy's children, I will help them. They need all the help they can get because of that prick. Yeah? I will help them unconditionally. I know what it's like. So, we're saying this unconditionally, and truth of the matter, we're not getting the help we need.
Babies are babies.
They're babies,
Anyway, thank you very much for your powerful evidence this afternoon. That concludes the time we've got for questions. But if there's anything additional that you want to provide to the committee, you're still welcome to do that on notice.
So I can still, because like I said, I got a few late minute stuff like this today, and the stuff with my niece that, the circumstances, how she was, how she had to step aside. She was pushed into that, against the wall, and these mob are just thugs and bullies. They're thugs and bullies, punks, scum of the earth.
So
Hope they're listening.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just got to get it out.
No, absolutely. So you'll be able to provide additional information to the committee until the 6th of August after today. And if there's, I don't think there was any questions on notice, but so if you can provide any additional information to the Secretary by the 6th of August. Thank you very much. And you'll have, after today, you've been involved in some Senate processes before, so you know that you'll be sent a copy of the transcript from today. And if you see any errors in there, you can request that they be corrected.
I'd like to make a request too. You might have got any video document of this one?
No, it's audio. We don't have any video here today, so audio is...
So can I get a copy of that, please?
Yeah. If you chat to one of the Secretariat members over here, they can let you know how you can do that. Right. Thank you very much to each of you for your attendance.
Thank you all too. Safe travels. Like I said, you couldn't pay me enough money to do what you might do, but I understand the circumstances. And just don't forget, please. Don't forget us, all the people you're talking to. You know how important everything you might do and the stuff that you do. But we're your constituents. We're the people you're supposed to look after in this place. Do your job. That's all. And particularly Labor. Tell that bloody bloke, that leader, whatever the Labor Party is. Stop. Close that door from them Zionists and that lobby group punks. We should be getting access to you mobbers just as much as more, if not more than them mob. Okay? So take care, stay safe, and don't forget us, eh?
Thank you very much. We'll now take a short suspension while we welcome the next witnesses. Thank you. I now call on representatives from the Association of Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages, ATSOL, NT, to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear? And I'll start with Ms Murray in the room.
Thank you. My name is Fran Murray. I'm a member of the executive of ATSOL NT. And I'd like firstly to thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of Australia's Indigenous language speaking children.
Thank you very much. And Ms Easton? Eaton?
Oh, hi. Yes, my name is Ruth Easton. I'm the president of ATSOL NT, and I teach at Yatala, a bilingual school in North East Parliament.
You might have your, do you have your phone on loudspeaker? Because you were just a little bit, like...
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah, a little bit crackly and a little bit muffled.
Okay.
So do you just want to introduce
Okay,
yourself
so say that again?
Yeah.
Okay, my name's Liz Easton. I'm the president of ATSOL NT, and I'm currently in Yatala today. I teach at a bilingual school in North East Arnhem-Land.
Thank you very much. Now, got a short spiel and then I'll invite you to make an opening statement. So, although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And it's also being broadcast live, just audio, on Parliament's website. Ms Easton, for your benefit, I'll let you know who's in the room with us. There are a couple of people from the committee who aren't in the room right now, but they will join us, I'm sure, as we get to questions. So I'm joined in the room today by Mr Chaffey, Deputy Chair Mr Venning, myself, Senator Stewart, I'm the Chair, joined by Mr G and also Senator Thorpe. If you're unfamiliar with how these processes work, usually you get a number of questions from one person at a time, so you don't have to guess at who's asking you questions for your benefit joining us via teleconference. I will now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Senator Stewart. So our submission documents how the funding of education for Aboriginal children is structural racism. The same decision made against the same children decade after decade. It is built into the way the Northern Territory funds its schools, and it recurs. The government has moved to cut or contract provision of bilingual education in the 1980s, 1998, 2008, and then more recently in 2024. At this point, roughly a third of the Territory's education budget never reaches a school at all. The clearest example of this structural racism is attendance-based funding. From 2013 to the end of 2024, the Territory funded schools on attendance, not enrolment. The government's own reviews found it left thousands of students unfunded, predominantly remote Aboriginal children. Ernst & Young found it in 2017 and the government kept it. Deloitte found it again in 2022 that about 5,000 students were getting no needs-based funding at all, and the government retained it for another 2 years. Between those dates, for every year, 2014 to 2025, attendance has been falling every year. Every Aboriginal student of secondary age today has been funded this way for their whole of their schooling. Those 12 years cannot be given back. In October 2024, as the government prepared to move to enrolment-based funding, it also moved against bilingual education. It proposed to fold in that targeted funding into a general per-student envelope. Money in that envelope goes into the school's global budget for principals to spend at discretion. When the Territory did the same thing to EALD funding in 2015, those specialist roles vanished from government schools. The only funding that is ever delivered to what these First Nations children need to succeed at school has been directed and conditional. The department in 2024 briefed us on the change that it was considering. It did not consult the communities. After we and our national body pushed back, it was withdrawn quietly, but the exposure remains. The department's standing policy is to keep moving targeted programs into that formula. The only figure on the public record for how much bilingual education costs is $2.12 million, which is 0.25% of the budget. That funding is what keeps some of the strongest Aboriginal languages in this country still being taught to Aboriginal students in government schools. In most remote schools, Aboriginal teachers are the linguistic and cultural bridge between the children and the classroom teacher. There are 342 of them. 65% of them are at the lowest pay level. Some have been working in schools for 15 years. 2026 was the first year that they were actually able to move up an increment. Commonwealth funding must be tied, directed to schools, conditional on reaching them, and separately reported because untied funding does not arrive. We put funding at the centre because in the Northern Territory, the pedagogy has been dismantled through the removal of funding. But the pedagogy is what matters, and Fran can speak to that far better than I can. So I'll hand over to Fran now, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Ms. Murray.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, ATESOL's very long submission to you boils down to one simple principle, and that is that every child has the right to understand what is being taught. Our Indigenous language speaking children in the Northern Territory are currently denied that right. They speak an Indigenous language on entry to school. They don't speak English, and yet school is offered in this strange, in the case of these remote territory communities, foreign language. They don't hear this language or need to use this language, English, outside of school for any purpose without the support of their first language surrounding them. They have had no previous experience of the use of English when they start school as young children, age 5, and they have not had the chance to develop their first language sufficiently well to an age when they can actually bridge to English as an additional language with academic success. So our submission is basically about educational equity. These children do not have educational equity with English-speaking Australian children, and that's wrong. Bilingual education is often misunderstood. It's not the teaching of an Indigenous language instead of English, and it's not the teaching of two languages instead of the curriculum. Bilingual education is the teaching of the curriculum through the language the children understand while they learn English. 50 years of experience of bilingual education in the Northern Territory and extensive international research in the area has established that it takes between 5 and 7 years for these children, closer to 7+ years, to achieve English at a cognitive academic language proficiency. Anything below that does not enable children to proceed to Year 10 and Year 12, and these children do not have access to an education that allows them that successful pass-through education. It's reflected in our poor attendance numbers. These children go into their classrooms, that they do go to that place and that space where education's presented as a Western entity through a foreign language, talking about these young children don't understand what this English-speaking teacher's saying. The assistant teacher role, which in effective bilingual education is the teacher of the curriculum through the student's language, has been reduced to one of behaviour management in these schools, and that's not their role. They're not paid to do that. They're paid in a good bilingual program to teach the children. The point about how long it takes to learn English is very important because we should not, as a nation, put these children's education on hold for 5 to 7 years before we start educating them. Because up until that point, we can't educate at age for grade. Up until that point, teachers are not receiving the information they need to engage these children with learning. Bilingual education is access to education. Without it, these children go into this foreign context with a teacher. 28% of our teachers are in their first year of teaching in a remote community. They have not, the infrastructure no longer exists in the Department of Education to provide a cross-cultural orientation for these teachers. They go there in front of these young children who do turn up to school with an assistant teacher under the misconception that the assistant teacher is a teacher assistant. That's not actually true. The key is in the noun. The assistant teachers are not assistants. They're not teacher assistants. They're not there to help you teach if you're teaching. They're there to teach the curriculum. They are assistant teachers. They assist in the teaching by teaching. And all of the infrastructure, given this changing policy environment over the last 50 years, has meant that education for these children has become very unstable. It's not predictable. The Indigenous staff and the Indigenous communities really want their children to be educated. They want them to be able to access education in its fullest form. They also deserve and need and have a right to maintain their own languages and for their children to develop cognitively in their first language, which is a prerequisite for cognitive achievement in English. That is well established in the international research. It's not an issue, it's well known in all of the information we have available to us. Currently, the Northern Territory is not making this available for our Indigenous language speaking students. That is structural racism. We're talking about educational equity here. We're not talking about delivering the same to everyone, because that does not result in equity. That does not value and respect difference for what it is. It's okay to live with difference. In fact, it's normal. We're treating difference as abnormal institutionally, and that's wrong. That's racist. We need to change the structures so that there is infrastructure to build in assistant teachers, Indigenous teachers' strength through correct training to full Indigenous teacher qualifications, so they can teach their children bilingually and in biliterate terms. Until that happens, our remote schools work as cross-cultural teaching teams, one non-Indigenous qualified teacher with one or two assistant teachers who should be able to access training that is relevant to that context. The current training available to those assistant teachers of our Indigenous language speaking students does not meet them where they need the skills and knowledge to do what they need to do in the classrooms. The courses they are currently offered teach an Aboriginal language. That is not bilingual instruction. Yes, every school in the Territory should be teaching an Aboriginal language. Darwin High School should be. Irakala School should be and is. Many schools are teaching an Aboriginal language. That's not the issue here. The issue is Indigenous language speaking students' access to the curriculum, to being taught the content of the Australian curriculum through a language they already know. That's not being made available freely. The funding's been continuously cut. The changing policy environment of the past 50 years, I'll quickly go through it for you. I do have a witness brief that will be available to you after, with this information in it. If you don't mind, I'll go through this. 1973, after the Labor government of the time, Gough Whitlam, announced that, yes, Australian Indigenous language speaking students, of course, can learn through their own language. So the Commonwealth Department, which ran the Northern Territory at the time, before we got self-determination in 78, established the first bilingual schools, Millingimby being the first. 73. Others were eventually added during 73. In the 1980s and 90s, the expansion increased across the NT to 22 programs, and almost half of our remote Indigenous language-speaking students were educated bilingually in the 80s and 90s. In 99 to 2000, the designated programs were reduced from 22 to 12 due to opinion-based decisions institutionally made. I think economics was probably the bottom line there, rather than considering what these children need and deserve and have a right to educationally. So 12 schools remained, but the focus moved from true bilingual learning to two-way learning. Now, schools can do two-way learning in English, through English. They can do it through their Aboriginal language. It doesn't necessarily mean that a child has access to the curriculum. Two-way learning is a much bigger, broader, and sometimes more vague concept than bilingual instruction. It's good in its context. For this context, it's too broad and too wide. In 2008 and 2009, a Labor Member of Parliament announced the first 4 hours of every day need to be conducted through English. And that restricted access to bilingual education significantly. So formal recognition and systemic support was reduced substantially, diminished substantially with that statement. 3-4 years later, that mandatory first 4 hours of English was withdrawn. The English-only requirement was withdrawn, but the bilingual infrastructure to support schools in delivering authentic bilingual instruction was not restored. In 2012 to 2026, we're talking of the past 24 years, there's been a continuing decline in specialist support in Aboriginal teacher pathways, in curriculum production, and, importantly, in public reporting on the state of children's access to education that they can understand. In 24 and 25, targeted bilingual funding uncertainty prompted renewed advocacy by ATSOL NT and by our National Council, the Australian Council of TESOL Organisations. And in 2024, the proposed removal of bilingual targeted funding really threatened the access of these children to the curriculum when it gets down to basic facts. And in 2026 currently, targeted bilingual funding is scheduled for further review. So those children, their parents, the assistant teachers out bush are left wondering on a yearly or biennial basis, will my children get the same education they got this year? Will it be better or worse than last year? I'm an assistant teacher in a remote school. Will I have a job next year? I'm a concerned, qualified EALD teacher in a remote community. Is my role here valued? Do I still need to teach EALD? What is mandated that I teach? What's mandated is not an EALD pedagogy. It's a pedagogy that has been proven to be detrimental to children who are learning English in terms of the way they're being taught, which is a synthetic phonics approach. It doesn't teach children what these foreign words mean. They're taught to decode them. That's easy to do. You and I can learn to decode any Indigenous language, I can do an hour session with you now and you'll be able to decode some traditional Indigenous languages, but you won't know the meaning of the words. That's where we've left these children with our current approaches to pedagogy, both EALD and lack of access to understanding the broad curriculum, all learning areas delivered by the assistant teachers through the language the children already have. That's vital. If we deny them access to education without the true implementation of bilingual education, that's a racist move, nationally and locally. The cumulative result of all these policy changes is not just that bilingual programs declined, but a whole interconnected system declined to meet the educational needs of these children. Bilingual schools declined. There are only 8 targeted funded schools in existence now. The infrastructure to support the application and implementation of appropriate pedagogies doesn't exist. Aboriginal assistant teachers with genuine curriculum teaching roles don't exist. It declined. Teacher linguists and their role at the school level, dealing with both languages and how they're implemented across the curriculum, declined. Literature production centres, vital, produced over those decades resources for kids to learn through their first language. Locally, and they produce local curriculum materials. Crucially, Bachelor College, later to become Bachelor Institutes, targeted, focused, specifically designed course to meet the needs of these assistant teachers no longer existed. It doesn't exist. The courses these assistant teachers have now do not meet their needs to become teachers of these children in classrooms tomorrow. We don't need to wait for them until 5, 10, 20 years' time. They are teaching in these classrooms tomorrow. Each element reinforced the others in this interconnected system. To remove one, and the rest became harder to sustain, and that's what's happened over these 50 years. It's been an undulating policy picture, often based on opinion rather than research and rather than knowledge. The question here is not whether bilingual education works. We know it does. The question is how have governments supported it, and the need is to support it with targeted funding, appropriate teacher training. Our submission actually can be boiled down into 4 main areas, and I'll just find what they are in your witness brief that I have available for you. They are certainly the provision of protected targeted funding with accountable conditions, so that systems have to publicly report on the delivery of the implementation of an education that gives children access to the curriculum. To deny children access to education is not acceptable, and that's what's happening. Okay, the 4 themes. Restore Aboriginal decision-making. Crucial. Most of these policy changes have been made without Indigenous decision-making involved. Fund schools according to the educational need of children who speak an Indigenous language and begin to learn English when they start school and don't experience English outside of that classroom. Their education must start in their own language. We cannot defer education for 7 years for these children. It's not right. And we need to recognise bilingual education and EALD as core educational provision, not special programs. It is core education provision. And measure success fairly. All of these children are measured against English language benchmarks as if they speak English. They're all deemed to be failures in NAPLAN. In the upcoming Year 1 phonics check, the national one, this is yet another assessment aimed really that measures what English speakers can do. It measures what these children should not be able to do. And it deems that measurement result as failure. So it creates a deficit where there is none. If we are permitted to educate these children in the language they already have, we find out what they can do. We don't get told what they shouldn't be able to do. Really important, so those 4 key themes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that opening statement. We'll go to Senator Thorpe for questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing today.
Thank you.
I've had feedback from teachers around the country about Aboriginal children being stopped from speaking language.
Yes.
This is happening in this country today, and it's clear that in the NT, the government has no respect for language. Given October 2024, it cancelled the tiny amount of $2.12 million for bilingual education. Is this part of an assimilation process of the NT government and the federal government as part of their hidden agenda to wipe out our languages as first intended at invasion of this country?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that word up, assimilation, because really the whole closing the gap concept has turned into one of assimilation. It actually says, okay, to close this gap, you guys, you Indigenous people, have to move across that gap to we non-Indigenous folk. That isn't an assimilation process. What we would prefer to work with in terms of ATISOL NT is to work with UNESCO's metaphor of a two-way bridge across that perceived gap, where Indigenous folk and non-Indigenous English speakers in Australia, either side of that bridge, but either learns to walk across, to and from, across that bridge, depending on the linguistic and the socio-cultural need of any particular point in time or context.
Thank you. What do you think? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm on the phone here. Was that Senator Thorpe?
Yes.
Yeah, look, definitely. Since the territory government took up control of education in 1979, but they've been actively, hostile to Indigenous language teaching in government schools. The first thing they did in 79 was make it a condition on a school being bilingual that the first object would be that the students learn English. Before that, when it was under Commonwealth control, it was about, building up the well-being and the strength-based teaching around Indigenous languages in schools. Oh, sorry, it's really hard, this echo on the line. And basically, the only time that bilingual education was really strong in the NT was when we had Aboriginal groups, not advisory groups, like groups that had real power in decision making. There was a group called FEPI in the 80s, and they were able to have a real say in education for Indigenous students in the NT, and they had a say about how money was spent. And I think this also linked into the national architecture at the time, which was the NAEC, the National Aboriginal Education Consultative, or I can't remember what the C stands for. And that's why there was good outcomes. The 90s, early 90s was when that program was at its strongest. You can kind of track the falling away of support for bilingual education in the 90s from 1996, which is when the coalition came to government. So, yeah, I would say that the NT government has always been hostile to Aboriginal languages being taught in school. And when it the Commonwealth has in the past, I think, played a really important role. I think in the mid-80s to the mid-90s, the Commonwealth was broadly, supportive of it. But certainly that support fell away in the late 90s. And of course, in 2008, we had the 4 hours of English-only instruction introduced, which I think the submission that we've provided does suggest that the Commonwealth had a role in that. The Commonwealth at the time was really focused on English literacy. They had these big national partnership agreements, and they were focused on NAPLAN, of course, as well. So although that 2008 to 2013-14 period, it wasn't good for bilingual schools, broadly it wasn't too bad for remote schools because they got a lot of funding. They got a lot of funding through those national partnership agreements. And I was working in those schools at the time. I was working in a bilingual school in Northeast Farmland, and we did still have the program. And just around that program, the school was well funded. There were so many, there were so many Aboriginal people working there. There were so many non-Indigenous people working there. The staff was, it was a well-funded school. It was great. And then basically from 2014 onwards, when those national partnership agreements stopped and when the Commonwealth started just putting all the money into untied funds, that is when it just really hit Indigenous education really hard, bilingual schools and all the remote schools and the urban schools as well. I can attest to that because I worked across urban and remote schools during that period. And yeah, the fall that we saw in attendance from 2014 onwards was just unprecedented. The NT has never seen a fall of Indigenous attendance like that since records.
Thank you. What do you think will be the impact of the NT government's compliance-based approach to education with its focus on attendance, issuing fines and referring parents to income management?
Sorry, Liz, did you want to say something first?
Well, look, it's just awful that this is happening, and that this is the approach the government is taking, because the NT government is the government that actively defunded those schools, that led to this huge drop in attendance. I mean, the remote school I'm working at, we get attendance officers come into the school to help to try and, they do try and go into family homes and they do try and get students to school. I'm not across what's happening with the fines at this stage, but I will just say we don't get anywhere near the support we need to do that re-engagement. Your colour school's got an attendance rate of about 40%, and that's actually not too bad. If you look at the other schools in this region, it's 30% is pretty common. So look, it's horrible. Aboriginal families are being punished through fines for the NT government's own, failure to provide for these students since over the last 12 years. So it's appalling that this is what they're doing. Fran, did you want to add to that?
Exactly the same. It's the wrong way to go about it. We want to engage communities and these children in education, and we want to make it available and accessible to them, not punish them for not walking through the door. That's not education. That's a ridiculous knee-jerk reaction in a behaviourist punishment type, you're doing the wrong thing slap approach.
And can I just add to that, the other side of this, it's not only just that the schools haven't got the funding to re-engage, and they didn't for 12 years, it's also the pedagogy that is being provided in these schools. This pedagogy came through the Indigenous Education Strategy, which ran from 2015 to 2024-25. And those programs were commercial programs that had been sourced in the US with direct instructions. The other one was Rewrite Inc., which came from the UK. And they were appalling. They didn't teach the students anything. I was in a remote classroom in 2023, and there were children in that, it was a homeland school, there were children in that room from different places. It was a funeral, so there was kids from outside, and about 12 to 15 kids. And they didn't know the letters of the alphabet. I was trying to get them to do some writing in English, and we were trying to spell the word big, And they just kept looking at me going, but and I was like, no, the letters, let's spell out the letters. And they didn't know because this Read, Write, Ink program had instructed teachers not to teach the students what the letters names were until the students were across all 44 phonemes of the English language. And that was not a good day. I've been out of remote school since 2013-14. I've been working in a remote school, then I went into the office. So this was my first time back in a remote school since that pedagogy had come in, and I was shocked.
Could I just add to that one point, and I did refer to this before, but those programs, the American Direct Instruction and the British Read, Write, Ink, cost millions of dollars, but they were written for English language speakers with reading difficulties. They're remedial programs. They were not created to teach English as an additional language. Bilingual education allows teachers to teach English properly. As I said, it's not Indigenous languages instead of English, it's both and. It's bilingual, biliterate, bicultural. And we need those 5 to 7 years to teach children English, and we need to access them to learning at the same time through their own language. Those programs do the opposite. They close the doors on all learning for those children.
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Mr. G.
Yep, thank you for your very, very extensive submission. A lot of work's gone into it, and it is appreciated. I'm just having a look at your recommendations, and one of them is community-led consultation and dedicated funding for bilingual delivery. Recommendation 3. Pretty common theme that has emerged throughout the 2-day hearings here in Darwin is not enough consultation with Indigenous communities, which leads to poor outcomes for various programs where that consultation doesn't occur. Can you elaborate on what sort of consultation you would like to see, how it can be improved, and why the need for dedicated funding for bilingual delivery?
Is it okay?
Yes, go ahead, Liz.
Look, I was just going to say, like, the last 12 years have been, very bad for Indigenous education in the NT, and one of the main reasons for that is 2014, the NT Indigenous education group that the government had been consulting was, abolished. That's when it ended, and that this period has definitely been the worst period since South government in '79, I would say. So I think I'm getting a bit of echo again.
We don't have an echo on this end, but certainly broadcasting will try
I'll
to
just
fix it
keep
up for
going.
you. Yeah.
So basically, there needs to be real authority with this group. They need to be consulted on Indigenous education policy and funding, and that they need to have a say, because the times when it has been good for learners, which was the late 80s through to the 90s, that was because I believe the Aboriginal groups in the NT and nationally, that they were feeding into government policy and funding. In terms of bilingual education, and I don't think there's ever been a systematic review of what this program costs. And as far as I know, I've not found any evidence of that. And I do know since 2021, when I say no, I'm pretty sure the funding has been frozen. So there has been no increase in the last 6 years. That's what the evidence I've got shows me. And the evidence I've got comes from written questions that were written by Yingi Agoyala. So all the evidence in this submission basically comes through those written questions and estimate transcripts, because they've never published what the cost of bilingual education is. So I would say that is absolutely something that needs to happen as soon as possible. Like, there needs to be a review of where the program is now, how it's staffed, how it's operating, what it needs to be stronger, because it's not strong. At the moment, there's one person in on paper, it looks like that the NT government has about 700 odd people not working in schools. And this is the big part of the systemic or the structural racism in the NT, is that so much money from the government education budget never gets to schools. That's anywhere between a quarter and a third. A lot of the, I think over the last 10 years, we've calculated that that's about $2.7 billion that has not gone near schools. It goes into jobs in the Mitchell Centre in Darwin, perhaps Alice Springs. And then the one person in there who actually has been employed to oversee the bilingual education program actually has 3 hats. So that person is in charge of EALD, they're in charge of the ILC curriculum, and then they're in charge of the bilingual programs that are operating in the 8 schools. So that needs to be reviewed. Like, there needs to be more systemic support, and we need to find, they need to find out how much it costs. And I would say that that all the bilingual schools need to have greater systemic support and be better funded. They're all sort of operating on a shoestring. They're all really damaged by that 12 years of effective enrolment funding. So yes, that's something that needs to urgently happen. And I'm worried because at the moment, what the department, what they're saying about the government school funding is that they're actively looking to try and find money in the targeted programs to put into the envelope, the student needs-based funding formula. So they're looking to sort of raid the targeted programs and put that into the student needs-based funding model. They're not looking at the 25 to 30% of the budget that is completely outside of the funding that goes to schools. And that's really where they need to find that money from.
So the money's not getting to where it's needed, i.e. schools. Is that?
That's correct. And the money that does get to schools is totally at the whim of the principal of the school as to how that money is spent. That's been the case since 2015 Australia-wide. It's called global funding. Government money to run schools has been delivered to the principal, and they've been told, and you have to feel sorry for the principals of schools too. Here's your budget, run your business. Basically, that's what schools are doing. So depending on what a particular school leadership believes should happen with that money happens. There's no consistent policy across the territory to say that Indigenous decision-making must be part of how you run your school within that budget, and that's what we need. A structure at community level, because the future of these kids' education sits within those communities. It sits within the adults in those communities being allowed to make decisions about their children's education. Those structures are not in place, and we need to put them back into place.
Thank you. Do I have time for one more?
We are due to conclude. We are past the time to conclude already. So
All right.
Senator Thorpe has indicated she's going to place questions on notice. I'll place some of my questions on notice as well. And it sounds like Mr G has got some questions on notice coming for you as well.
Good.
So that does conclude the time we have for questions this afternoon. Thank you very much for your appearance.
Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
And for giving us the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for the work you do.
Thank
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that concludes today's proceedings. Thank witnesses who have appeared throughout today and yesterday for their attendance and for their assistance in this inquiry. I want to thank Broadcasting and the Secretariat for everything they do to keep us running. I declare this hearing closed.